Welcome to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, the show that delves into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the worlds of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we've got you covered.
Welcome. You are listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network. My name is Maya, and I will be your host for the show. I do want to start off by just apologizing real quick to you guys because I have been battling a cold for just a few days here, and I'm afraid you still can hear that sickness in my voice. I'm doing my very best to block it so that my sickness does not reach your ears, but unfortunately there's only so much I can do about it. So we are powering through nonetheless. That being said, I do want to also start you guys off with a little bit of introduction to the show. So I want to let you guys know I'm not an expert in finance. So this isn't like an expert column, but I am here to report financial news, talk about how stocks are changing. We're going to talk about some other news events that will affect finances, and also go over some tips and advice, things that you guys can keep on your radar and just, put in your back pocket as some little memos that may be helpful for you. Any other questions or things that come up, we'll let you guys know how you can contact and maybe send in some questions. And I would be happy to look into them for you and do a little bit of research and a little bit of digging so that hopefully you can get some of your answers and some of your information from here instead of having to do all the hard work by yourself. So let's go ahead and start off. We have a lot of things to talk about today. And the first one that I want to go over with you guys is the housing market for 2020. So this is something that is all in my circle right now. There's a lot of people who are around my age who are looking to buy houses and are interested in kind of getting their toes wet in the in the housing market for the first time. So as we all know, if you're a younger millennial, you're probably hitting your 30s during this decade. And that means that this is kind of your decade to be introduced to real adulthood. You have so much going on, and buying your first house is one of those things. So luckily, things are looking up for the housing industry. Lots of people are planning to buy a home this year. More millennials, like I said, are getting in on this hustle, and mortgage rates are remaining low. So some problems from 2019 still pervade the upcoming year, most notably the lack of homes that are available for sale. But regardless of that little trip in the road, we still have plenty of other optimistic things to look forward to. So first off, the number of new mortgages given to first-time homebuyers is expected to increase to 8.3 million over the next 3 years, beginning at 2020, the onset of this new decade. This number is awesome. It's almost 700,000 more mortgages than were allotted in the 3 years prior, from 2017 to 2019. And that's according to TransUnion. Joe Melman is the senior vice president from TransUnion, and he does not believe that the scarcity of available homes is actually going to have any significant impact on the housing market. In fact, he's quite optimistic about it. So he states, quote, "We're actually anticipating interest rates will stay low, unemployment at an all-time low, and real wage growth over inflation will be positive," end quote. However, it is good to bear in mind that with all of this good news, low unemployment rates, low mortgage rates, etc., this brings stronger competition. So you and your fiance won't be the only ones jumping on that spacious corner lot because so many people are hopping on the good news all at once. So it's definitely recommended to come prepared when you make an offer on a home. Make sure that you have absolutely all of your paperwork in line. Do not leave out any documents. Do not slack on your timeline, and add personal touches if your state allows for it. Some states do not allow you to do things like this, but if you have the option for it, it always gives you a little bit of a leg up if you can include a photograph, maybe of you and your family, add a personal letter. Letters of recommendation are always good, especially the bank letter. Usually that one's necessary though. But not having all of your ducks in a row could knock you off the list of candidates for a home, or at best, it could delay the process just because of how competitive it looks like the market is going to be this year. So if you can add everything that you can do, it's going to help you. This will help the seller definitely feel more inclined to sell to you. And it might give you a slight advantage if you can add those personal notes we were talking about, especially if you're a young new family. Because, I mean, who doesn't want to help out the newlywed couple with a baby on the way? Projections also suggest that home builders are planning to produce more mid-range homes in 2020 as well. This is really good news for the housing market. This may help some first-time homers to skip the introduction or entry house altogether and just fast forward to a forever home or a more permanent home that remains within their financial boundaries. It'll also free up more entry-level homes. So consider the scenario. You have some people who have a little bit more extra money, maybe a little bit, more capability to go ahead and jumpstart into one of those mid-range homes. They're going to go ahead and take up the mid-range homes as they're being produced at a higher rate this year. Then we also have those who started off in the entry house and they're ready to take the next step and move into the mid-range house. And because there's going to be so many of those available, they're going to have the ability to do that. So that also frees up more entry-level houses for the other people who are not ready to fast forward into the mid-range house. So it frees up mid-range homes for those who are ready for it and entry-level homes for those who are just starting to get their feet on the ground. And this is just awesome because it really frees up so many opportunities for people to go ahead and get their first-time home in. So if you are on the market for a new home this year, be aware of a few key tips as you move forward with the process. First, know that you may need to change your must-have list to a would-be-nice list. With the scarcity of homes that are available on the market, you'll probably get a good deal, but you might have to sacrifice a few things, so remember to stay flexible. Secondly, bear in mind that it may be necessary to look at older homes that require updating and renovations. Like I said, with the would be nice list, maybe consider that you have an older home and it doesn't have the big patio that you wanted to have. But you can look at that as an option in the future. You can add renovations and whatnot that can put your would be nice list closer to tangibility and bring it closer to you. But you just have to look a little further down the road. Lastly, jump on it quickly if you are ready to purchase a home because experts from mortgage lending companies are predicting that housing prices will rise by the end of 2020, leaving us in a pretty strong seller's market. But this doesn't really come as any surprise if you've paid attention to home values. They've been steadily increasing for the past 8 years, but it does let us know that faster action results in better deals. So basically, if you are prepared to purchase a home, the sooner the better because prices are only going up. So I do want to talk about how millennials feel about this just a little bit because 56% of millennials reported being very concerned about an upcoming recession. I think this figure speaks a lot about millennials because millennials were children when the housing recession of 2008. So when this recession came about, while millennials were children, millennials watched their parents, their teachers, their loved ones, etc., go through some pretty serious struggle and a lot of loss. And so it makes sense that this recession really imprinted on them strongly. So it's no doubt why millennials are skeptical and slow to buy homes now that they approach their early adult years. So as a lot of millennials are anticipating this recession, most of them, and by most I mean 56%, are choosing to wait until after that impending recession in order to buy a home at all. So it's kind of a toss-up. Like, do you jump on it right now, or do you wait because we anticipate a recession? Daryl Fairweather, the chief economist at Redfin, says that millennials' hesitancy is actually unwarranted and unnecessary. He believes that if another recession does hit, it will not be nearly as bad as what we've seen in the past, and therefore it shouldn't hinder us from purchasing new homes. He believes actually that over the course of 2020, the recession should be minimal. So this is really good news. If you have some hesitancy about purchasing a new home, you can take a little bit of a break and just trust that if we do have a recession, hopefully, according to the experts, it shouldn't be too bad. At this point, however, mortgage rates are remaining workable and appealing, sitting right around 3.5 to 4%. So it does appear that right now is a pretty good time to go ahead and get in on a good deal. These rates are only expected to last for maybe 2 years, according to the CEO of Nations Lending Corporation. If you cannot qualify for a traditional mortgage, there are a few key things that you can do if you'd like to purchase a home. First, as you're probably able to guess, improve your credit score. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can consider working with a nonprofit housing counselor if you don't have the availability or the funds for a financial advisor. Then you can also look at loans backed by the Federal Housing Administration or the Department of Veteran Affairs. These programs can be especially beneficial when buying a home because they can help reduce closing costs and down payments. Because let's be honest, when you purchase a new home, there are so many other things that go into play. Let's say buying new furniture, landscaping perhaps, cleaning supplies, and all kinds of other setup costs. So it's always a good thing to keep your initial costs down as much as you possibly can. So thank you so much for listening to the first segment. This was just a little touch on the housing market for 2020. And when we get back from this quick break, we're going to talk a little bit about some scandal going on in Tokyo. If you haven't heard about this, it is a fun story. So hang tight and we'll be
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Welcome back. My name is Maya. So sorry about my cold voice again. However, we are jumping back into it. So we just went over some information about the housing market for 2020, and now we are jumping into some scandal going on in Tokyo. There are some really interesting things going on with the former chairman of Nissan, Carlos Ghosn, who performed a little magic act this week as he managed to escape from Tokyo and flee, quote, political persecution. Ghosn had been on house arrest in Tokyo since he was first arrested in November of 2018 after arriving in Tokyo in a Nissan company jet. He had been detained for somewhere around 120 days. He was interrogated in police detention twice, as this 120-day period was broken up into two sections. He had been on bail and was awaiting trial in Tokyo for months since then. The trial date had reportedly been pushed back more than once. So he had been arrested on 4 separate accounts of financial misconduct, including embezzlement, all which tied in some way to his time spent at Nissan. It's kind of interesting if you want to paint a picture of what his time looked like during the house arrest. So if we want to kind of describe that, because he was on house arrest for quite some time in Japan, and it's quite different than what you might imagine house arrest looks like. In the US, most of the time we have house arrest that's pretty relaxed, actually. But it looks like his house arrest was something quite different. He had members of the prosecution stationed outside of his house on a 24/7 basis. He was not allowed to see his wife. He could see other people, other friends and family, etc., but he was not allowed to see his wife. And obviously one of the major parts of his house arrest was that he could not leave the country. He did have the ability, with the permission of the court, to move around within Japan from city to city, but it had been made clear that he was not to leave Japan, of course. He had cameras outside of his home as well, so that all of the activity of Mr. Ghosn and all others was recorded as people entered and left the home, and so that all of his meetings were kind of just kept up with, and we knew what was going on. Authorities must have been notified of who he was meeting with as well. He was followed if he went to the park. Private detectives or police authorities would follow him and whatnot. So we can see that he was under tight surveillance, and it seemed that escape was pretty impossible. And yet, with all of this security and being a man with a lot of power and a very recognizable face, he was still able to slip out from their grasp and get out of Japan. So he was last seen in Tokyo on the 29th of December. On the 25th, on Christmas Day, he met with his lawyers, where he was told he'd likely be spending quite a bit of time in Japan. I don't think that he was super excited to hear that news. And people who knew Ghosn very well said that he had had this escape plan in the making for upwards of 3 months. So it looks like upon news that he would be stuck in Japan, he decided to put his escape plan into action. So on the 29th, he allegedly walked out of the house and somehow disappeared. A flight plan shows a private jet leaving around 400 kilometers away from Tokyo, which flew to Istanbul, and then a plane went from Istanbul. So this is assumed to be the airplanes and the pathway that he took to escape the country. There's a little bit of question. How does Japan feel about this? Japan most likely is experiencing some relief that he's gone, as their justice system was about to be put under some national scrutiny, or rather international scrutiny, but also perhaps embarrassed that he was able to escape. Who knows? There are those who question whether or not the lawyers knew about this plan, those who question whether the court was right to grant him bail in the first place, etc. These are all just questions up in the air, though. But we do know that Japan has a 99% conviction rate, and they're very proud of their conviction rate as well. So it's no wonder that Ghosn was eager to get out of there, because he was most likely going to be convicted for his 4 different counts of financial misconduct. There was really a very slim, might I say 1% chance that he was going to be pronounced innocent. So, since then, Ghosn has been found in Lebanon. He has been speaking publicly from Lebanon. He has also let us know that he is more than happy to talk to the press from Lebanon about his situation. He seems to be pretty outwardly spoken about the whole situation, especially for somebody who has been accused of 4 different counts of financial misconduct and embezzlement. Japan has no extradition treaty with Lebanon, which states that Ghosn entered the country legally, and therefore there is no plan from Lebanon to take action against Ghosn. For the foreseeable future, since Ghosn is a Lebanese native, he is expected to remain in Lebanon. He seems to be quite comfortable there, and there's no issue from the country with him being there. So, it seems like he will be comfortably remaining in Lebanon, in his home country. So, we do have a little bit of an update since the events have taken place. It's kind of been slowly unfolding as the days move along. But it was recently discovered that Ghosn was able to actually escape Japan by squeezing himself into a musical equipment box. One of those, large boxes that you might find, like a drum set or some set equipment, like a pretty good sized box, a little bit bigger than a regular suitcase. So it appears that this is one of the containers, or this was the container, that he was able to leave Japan in. So a group of former paramilitary officers disguised as musicians helped to smuggle him onto the aircraft and escape Japan. The box was found with holes drilled into the bottom of it for breathing. And it was basically just carried onto the airplane with a bunch of other musical equipment. They were trying to pass off as a band or a musical group of some sort. And no one thought anything of it. So they made it onto the airplane. The Wall Street Journal reported that the music crate, which transported Ghosn during the flight to Istanbul, Turkey, had been found empty in Turkey with holes drilled in the bottom, like we said, for breathing. Then Ghosn climbed out of the box upon entering Turkey and boarded another business plane to arrive in Lebanon, where he has been comfortably staying since then. So it's a pretty crafty escape, I have to say. Is it the right thing to do? I don't know, but it's clever. It's pretty clever. It is interesting to me that no one thought to ask what was in these big boxes before they got on the plane. Maybe it was because it was a business flight or something like that, so they have different ways of doing security. But I know that if I tried to bring a person in a box, I would never be able to make it onto an airplane. So this is really an interesting story. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed listening to that little bit about some scandal going on in Tokyo. Next, after the break, I do want to talk a little bit about some financial resolutions that people have set up for the year of 2020, starting off the new decade with some strong goals in mind and how we might be able to accomplish that. So I look forward to talking to you guys. Hang tight.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Welcome back. Once again, you guys are listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network. And my name is Maya. Thank you so much for listening today. So we just got done talking about some interesting events that took place in Tokyo last week regarding Carlos Ghosn, the former chairman of Nissan. We'll have to keep up with that and see what moves forward. If anything else unfolds from that story, I'll let you guys know. But moving forward, I want to talk about some financial resolutions that a lot of people are setting for themselves and their families in the beginning of this new decade. Wallet Hub reported that nearly 99 million people will include financial goals in their New Year's resolution this year. That is a lot of people, and it says a lot about what we want as a society, but let's take a closer look. What are those financial goals, and how do people plan to attain them? According to a recent survey from Fidelity Investments, the top 2 financial resolutions of this year include increasing savings and paying off high debt, very shortly followed by the third place resolution, spending less. But when we look at the percentage of people who reported these answers on the survey, I think it tells us a little bit more about what people think as far as saving money and what we're really willing to do in order to meet our financial goals or any other goals, really. How realistic are we about things that we want to achieve? And how can we help ourselves and each other to start working in realistic ways to achieve our goals? So there's only a couple of statistics that I think are really necessary to look at to even begin to get a grasp of what people are hoping to accomplish. So in this survey from Fidelity Investments, 53% of people reported that they wanted to save more money. 53%. 51% of people reported that they wanted to pay down high debts. And finally, 35% of people reported that they wanted to spend less. To me, this is really interesting, just the way that these numbers lay out, because it kind of doesn't make sense, actually. If more than half of people want to save more money and pay down their debts, you have to have money in order to do those things. You have to have somehow more money or be more responsible with the money that you do have. Which doesn't line up with the fact that only 35% of people wanted to spend less. So that means that the more than half of people who wanted to save more or pay down their debts, I guess they wanted to do that without spending less money. So they want to keep spending the same amount of money and also save money and also pay their debts. We have to kind of take a step back and take a look at what we want to do and how we're going to do it. Because if you're going to achieve these other goals, it requires sacrifice sometimes. And it looks like people are not really lining up what it requires in order to achieve their goals. And it looks like they just want to miraculously have more money or have more savings or have less debt. It doesn't make sense. So that being said, we're going to take a look at how we can actually make these goals come true and what you can do in order to save more money, in order to pay down your debt, and how to actually spend less money. Because I'm sorry, guys, you got to spend less money if you want to save more money. That's how it works. So, unless you get a raise, and then you can keep spending money. That's great. So, first thing I'm going to talk about is setting clear goals for your savings. We're going to kind of go in order. First, we're going to talk about how to save more money, then a couple of options how to pay down debt, and then how to spend less. So, number one, set clear goals for your savings. Make sure it can be met in terms of both time and dollar amount. Set increments of time by which you can follow your plan. Like an amount per paycheck to set aside, or maybe an amount per month to set aside. So realistically, analyze your monthly spending and what you need versus what you spend, and then take a look at what you can do to save more consistently. So consider scheduling money to be deposited, perhaps on a regular basis, into something like a high-yield savings account online. Depositaccounts.com features an article entitled The Best Savings Accounts in December 2019. And this article compares several accounts which provide roughly 2% annual percentage yields, which is 10 times the APR of a traditional bank. So we'll be posting the link to this article on the GSMC Financial News Twitter account. Be sure to follow us to see this article and keep up with some future information. If you are interested in looking at a new savings account, here you go. Here are some possible options for you. Other possible ways to contribute to your savings goals include your 401k or IRA accounts. If you don't already have a retirement fund established, speak with your employer or an expert to see how you can begin. However, it might make it actually more difficult for you to set your savings sights, I suppose, on all of these things at once, all of these 401ks and savings accounts and all these things. So I would strongly recommend to pick a goal, determine a method of obtaining it, set yourself a reasonable time frame, and then stick with it. So just pick one thing that you think you can really put your efforts towards and make it happen. Secondly, as far as debts, have a strategy or a plan to pay off your debts. If, like a lot of people, your debts lie heavily in credit cards, then there are a lot of things and a lot of ways that you can go about tackling this goal. You can start off by paying off a card with the lowest balance and then move to the card with the next lowest balance, etc. You could also start with the card that has the highest interest rate in order to reduce the unnecessary payment that doesn't really go towards your debt per se. Another option, if you do have good credit already, is to apply for a 0% interest credit card. You may be able to transfer your balance to the new card with 0% interest, which will help you to consolidate your payments for easier management. You have much less possibility or availability for making late payments, which is even better for your credit. And it will also reduce the amount that you're paying in interest, obviously, because you have 0% interest. Sometimes the 0% interest only lasts for a given amount of time, like 12 months, but that does give you a good head start on paying off your debt so that you can really, make a good solid effort at it before interest starts building again. So long as you are diligent about not using your credit cards while you're trying to pay them off. Make sure you do not use your credit cards while you're trying to pay off your debt. All right, last point. Figure out how to spend less. This is so important. Like I was talking about earlier, you cannot save money or pay off your debts without spending less money unless you start making more money. So assuming that you are making the same amount of money, you must figure out how to budget your spending. According to the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, only 42% of people have actually worked out a budget. I think this is kind of crazy. I mean, I'm the kind of person who has to know where every dollar is going, and I plan it all out months in advance. If you don't have a budget in place, then you probably don't even know how much you're spending. And if this is you, then you got some homework to do. Sit down and write it out. How much do you make in a month? How much do you spend on bills, including rent, mortgage, car payments, credit cards, child support, insurance, everything? How much do you spend on subscriptions or memberships like Amazon Prime or Spotify or that one magazine that you never read? By the way, go ahead and unsubscribe from all the magazines you don't read while we're on this topic. Do you have a budget or number in mind for groceries or for clothes or for gas? And after all of these necessities are taken care of, then you can start to look at fun money. Like the money that you spend on date nights and drinks and comedy shows and manicures. So the money that you drop into the vending machine, more than you'd like to admit, or the money that goes towards parking that's always way too expensive and you keep forgetting the ticket and you never get it validated. That is fun money. And that is the money that must be budgeted in order to find out how you can spend less. Manage your subscriptions. Take a look at any monthly money that seems to be going away towards a tanning membership, even though you haven't tanned in months because it's January. Go ahead and cancel all of those things and then take a look at how much money you're really spending. How much money do you spend on a month just buying drinks? Can you save that money? Can you maybe try to make it for happy hour instead of the late nights? Or can you cut back? How much do you spend on clothing? How much do you spend on other people? How much do you spend on getting your hair done? How much do you spend whatever? So you have to really be very, very, very honest with yourself when it comes to spending money and how to spend less money. You have to really hold up a mirror and take a look at what you're doing and how you can change, because this isn't just about numbers. It's really about habits and it's about lifestyle. So you have to be able to kind of introspectively see yourself and your habits for what they really are and be willing to make a real life change. So with that being said, that will wrap up our little segment here on 2020 financial resolutions. I hope that you guys are sticking to your resolutions so far. And if you're not, it isn't too late. Even if you already gave up, you can pick it up again, because there's nothing about New Year's that makes it different from any other day. We can always start over. So hang tight and we will be back soon. And we're going to talk about how going green can save you money.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, guys. You are listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network. My name is Maya. So, we just talked about financial resolutions for 2020. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys to not only get a feel for maybe how you stack up against your neighbor, if you didn't realize that other people were making resolutions, or if you felt like maybe you were the only one under that pressure. Just know that 99 million people are making financial resolutions this year. You are not alone. So, moving forward, we want to talk about how going green can help you to save money. They don't have to be mutually exclusive items, being financially responsible and being environmentally responsible. So there's been so much going on in the last several years about going green, and it's becoming not only trendy to be environmentally friendly, but it's kind of actually necessary. But going green can do even more than help the environment out. It can help your wallet. Some of you may already know this, or you may instill these little hacks, but plenty of you may not have heard them. So those are the people that I am geared towards. And if you are someone who already knows about these hacks and you forgot them or haven't been instilling them or haven't shared them with your neighbors, go ahead and spread the good word, guys. Here are a few things that you can do that will introduce some kindness to your environment and to your budget. So let's start with a few things you can do in your home. There are plenty of small tricks and DIY type hacks that you can implement that will save your money and your conscience. One simple thing you can do is control your water usage. Some states even have laws on how often you can water your lawn, like the state of Texas does, but you can cut down on the amount of water you use by limiting the number of days and minutes that you water your lawn, even without laws in place to tell you to do so. You can also install sink water aerators and low-flow shower heads in your kitchen and bathroom water outlets in order to greatly impact the amount of water you use on a daily basis. Another big thing to consider is using LED lights instead of regular light bulbs. The difference they will make on your electric bill will make you very happy. They also have a much longer lifespan than a regular light bulb, so you don't have to change the light so frequently. Some of the LED lights out there can last for up to 10 years. They're pretty impressive. So next time you head to the store, take a look at LED lights if you haven't already installed those in your house. And they install just like regular lights. If you haven't used them before, it's the same thing, nothing fancy. Other ways to reduce electricity use includes unplugging everything that you can while you're not using it. A lot of people didn't know that your phone charger, for example, still uses electricity even when your phone is not plugged in. So now you know that. Make sure that when you are not using electronics, they are completely unplugged from the walls, because otherwise you are still using unnecessary electricity. Alrighty. Lastly, in terms of electricity, try to hang dry or line dry as many clothing items as you can. There's a lot of benefits to this. Not only is it going to save your clothes, dryers can be pretty rough on your clothes, and that's just throwing money out the door. Clothes are expensive, let's be honest. So you don't want to put a nice piece of clothing you just spent $80 on a pair of jeans or something like that in the dryer and all of a sudden they don't fit. Or it gets torn up, or you get it put in with the wrong kind of fabric, softener, all kinds of stuff can go wrong in the dryer, so spare yourself. Dryers also do not even have an Energy Star rating on them. That's how tough they are on your electricity use. So minimize your use of your dryer, lower your electric bill, and reduce your impact on the environment by trying to hang dry or line dry as many clothing items as you can. Okay, here's one that you might really like. Stop junk mail from hitting your mailbox. I personally was so frustrated with junk mail for the longest time. It's a waste of paper, it's a waste of my mailman's time, and it just fills up my trash can faster. So when I found a way to actually stop junk mail, I really jumped on it. Now, this tip doesn't save you money in a direct way, but time is money, guys. Save yourself the time and frustration of going through all of your junk mail so that you can get out there and have a productive day. A handful of websites like DMA Choice or directmail.com can help you get off of commercial lists for promotional mail. So go check that out and save yourself the time, save the planet from all this paper. A huge way to help out the environment and your wallet is by purchasing second hand. So not only does this reduce your consumer footprint, but it is typically far less expensive than buying brand new items. I have seen so many things online that are for sale secondhand that are brand new items, but just because they are not sold from the original seller, they're so much less expensive. $1,000 tables and whatnot being sold for under $200. I mean, it's pretty impressive. Now, if you do want to continue buying new items, there are companies who provide less expensive items that are still environmentally conscious. Some of them will even save you money down the road too. So some companies like Reformation Clothing focus on high-end fashion that is very fairly priced, but offers ethically sourced clothing. Other companies like the Zero Waste Store, I'll say that one again, so you can actually hear it. The Zero Waste Store, because I always slur that one. That one focuses on providing items that reduce overall waste, as is suggested in the name. This is always a great option, not only for going green, but also for saving money and also for saving time. So consider this. You make a one-time purchase of an organic cotton rag that is washable and reusable. Maybe you even buy 2 or 3 of them to rotate. If you're like me, then you assign one color to the dishes, one to wiping down the countertops, and the other one to cleaning. So then all of a sudden, you have no need for paper towels, right? And in a matter of weeks, you will have saved your money on paper towel purchases and saved the time, trash, and effort that goes into purchasing and using paper towels. So, good investment and good for the earth. I'll call that a win-win. And when I don't have a cold, I could call it a win-win without ending win with a D. There are tons of other similar products out there, like organic cotton rags. Solid shampoo and conditioner bars are far less expensive than most bottled brands and typically last a lot longer too. Do your research on those because some of them don't last as long. It just depends on which ones you purchase, but some of them can last 3 to 4 times longer than a bottle of shampoo. That means less money spent on hair care and less garbage in your trash can. There are so many other ways to save money and go green at the same time. I'm sure that you can all think of plenty on your own, like carpooling or installing a water filter instead of drinking bottled water. But whatever things, little tips and tricks and small things that you can do along the way, they will help you to pinch your pennies and they will help you to reduce your impact on the environment. So it's just goodness from all sides. Alrighty, when we come back, you guys, we will be talking about a little bit of news as far as stocks and what's going on with the Dow at the beginning of 2020. So Thank you for listening today. Hang tight, and I'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. You are listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Network. Thank you so much for listening today, for sticking with me. My name is Maya, and we just went over how to save money and go green at the same time. A lot of people probably don't connect these two topics together, but they really go hand in hand pretty well. Next, I want to talk a little bit about some news that's been going on at the stocks. For the beginning of this season, we cannot have a financial news podcast without talking about stocks. So, jumping in. 2019 was a pretty solid year as far as the stock market goes, but 2020 has been taking a little bit of a rough hit. Just right at the get-go, everything started to kind of fall apart, more or less. It's nothing to be seriously worried about, but it did cause a little bit of mayhem just at the onset of the season. To begin with, the Dow Jones Industrial Average took a pretty good hit earlier last week, which caused some pretty serious concern across the market. For a brief moment late last week, the Dow dropped by 360 points. After a matter of hours, however, the Dow had neutralized somewhat, but still remained in the red by 172 points, or about 0.6%. This was the biggest drop the Dow had seen in the past month. So there was a little bit of concern, but not the end of the world. As the Dow dropped by 0.6%, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ composite also fell by 0.5%. U.S. crude oil prices also rose last week. Prices increased by 3.2%, causing almost immediate discussion of global economic impact due to the energy crisis and how that relates to crude oil. So there was a lot of concern over there as well. Following in line with this kind of waterfall of events, U.S. airline stocks were also impacted, taking an overall hit as a result of the increased oil prices. American Airlines, United Airlines, and Delta Airlines all dropped by over 2%. Energy stocks, on the other hand, tend to kind of follow inverse patterns when it comes to oil prices, so they were looking great. And if you have investment in energy, then congratulations. Devon Energy rose by 0.7%, Apache rose by 1.3%, and Concho Resources climbed up by 2.7%. Defense stocks all increased as well last week, with Lockheed Martin taking the lead by a long shot. Lockheed Martin's stocks went up by 416.40 points, or 4.26%. And finally, gold prices jumped up last week to $1,547 per troy ounce, up by 1%. Now, all of the numbers we just reviewed have since been updated, of course, as stocks are consistently changing. So these were numbers from last week. I do feel it was important to discuss some of those numbers, as last week was the onset of the season. And it also was kind of a big event. All of this happened within like a day. And it was pretty big news as that took place. So just to give you guys a little bit of I guess, an update on what's going on, some of these numbers will revise. So the Dow rose yesterday, which would have been Monday, I want to say the 6th of January. Yes. Dow rose yesterday by 68.5 points, recovering from some of its loss from last week. Again, last week we had an overall loss of 172, but we have come back up just a little bit by 68.5. So that's a pretty good recovery considering. The S&P 500 restored by 0.4%, which is great. Pretty equivalent to the restoration that hit the Dow. And the NASDAQ composite rose by 0.6%. So with the NASDAQ composite rising by 0.6%, that's actually an overall improvement from last week, which is great. U.S. crude oil prices did go up to $63.27 per barrel. So that does give us a little bit of a hint that gas prices may be increasing a little bit in the weeks to come. So keep an eye out and make sure to use up your Kroger points or whatever points you have available for gas. And gold prices landed at a 7-year high at $1,566.20 per troy ounce. Congratulations to all of those who have invested in gold. So, we just went over a lot of numbers, a lot of different stock values, a major domino effect from one thing to the next. But what are we supposed to make of all of this stuff? What can we expect in the upcoming weeks or months even? And I also want to kind of describe what we're talking about. Maybe we have some listeners who are listening to this financial news podcast who don't understand stocks, don't know what these things mean. Why is there a domino effect? Why are they linked to each other? What are all these points? So let's talk about these just a little bit. So first off, basics with this system. When we talk about points in the stock market, typically 1 point is equivalent to $1. So if we say, for example, that a certain stock, like Lockheed Martin, right? So Lockheed Martin stocks increased by 416.4 points. What that means is that one share of Lockheed Martin stock increased by $416.40. So that gives you kind of an estimate or a good understanding of what's going on with this. Now, there's all kinds of experts and mathematicians and people who really know what's going on with all of this stuff, and every bit of a point, every percentage, every little inflection means a lot to them. But as far as we're concerned today, this is just getting an understanding of what the market is doing. Then when we talk about different major stocks, right? So when we look at something like the Dow Jones Industrial Average, what is this? Why is it important? There are 3 different, I suppose, numbers you could say that people watch to give us a broad understanding of what the stock market is doing. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average is one of those 3, and the Dow Jones represents the average stock price of the 30 largest companies in the United States. So the Dow Jones is kind of a representation of how the U.S. stock market is doing based on those largest 3 companies. Then we also have the S&P 500, which, as you can also predict, this is the 500 largest companies in the United States. Then we have the NASDAQ composite. This one is more heavily composed of information technology or IT companies. So this one focuses a little bit more on technology. So that being said, now you understand what those 3 are comprised of and what they represent. The reason why people watch these 3 is because they're considered to be the 3 best representative indexes of the United States stock market. So when we watch those and then we hear about these points and whatnot, that gives you a good understanding of what's going on. And then when we talk about the domino effect, for example, how oil prices affected airline stocks. All of these things are tied together in a huge network, a huge system. It's like a big net. If you pull on one thread of the net, it doesn't just pull that thread, it pulls all the threads. And almost everything is affected to some degree, with those threads closest to it being pulled the most. And that's kind of how you can think about this. So, for example, when oil prices increase, then airlines have to adjust for how they, price their tickets and all that, everything. So, oil prices increase, so the tickets to fly from here to there increase. So their stocks, also dropped. And then energy prices increase, and then defense stocks increase, and all these things, they're all tied together. So it's easy to, at some point, when you kind of start to gain a broader understanding of what is involved with what else, you start to understand that when one piece of the puzzle is shifted or pulled on, then the rest of the net moves with it. So we just went over a lot of numbers and all this kind of stuff. Now that we went over all of these, what can we expect? Analysts have been forecasting an upcoming recession for the last few months, but Chief U.S. policy strategist Greg Valliere warns us that, quote, there's a reason, finally, for caution in the stock market. Eventually, there will be an uneasy truce, but that's a long, long way off. This will get worse before it gets better, end quote. So it looks like we do have some reason for a little bit of caution, but this does come as an opposition to a lot of other experts who say that the recession that many have been anticipating for this upcoming year or decade, etc., they're all saying that the recession is expected to be very mild. So while Mr. Valliere is warning us that we have reason for caution in the stock market, many others are saying we need to be cautious but not fearful. So I guess that's the big takeaway for the end of today. And when we get back from this quick break, we will talk about an interesting partnership between BBVA Bank and a Michelin star restaurant, and how they're going to move their sales in a new direction this year. So hang tight, and we'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. You are listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network, and my name is Maya, your host. This is our final stretch of this podcast. I'm so excited to have been here with you guys this week. Thank you so much for stopping in and for sticking around with me. So we just wrapped up a discussion just momentarily talking about some of the stock numbers of 2020, how the season began, and just talking about what those numbers mean, introducing some of our younger or newer listeners to what that means, just on a really broad basis. So hopefully that can help you guys get started in understanding what that means. I want this to be kind of a learning process for everybody. So if you have questions or comments, etc., please feel free to reach out to us. And we'll try to cover as many topics as we can and try to become more involved with the discussion as we move along, so that we start off vague and move our way into more complex understanding of what's going on. So the last thing I want to talk about is a interesting merger between, or not a merger, but a union, I would say, between BBVA Bank and a 3 Michelin star restaurant called Cellar de Roca, which is a restaurant in Spain. Of course, BBVA Bank is also based out of Spain. And so these two companies have merged together. They've actually been merged together. I'm sorry, I keep saying merged together. They are doing business together. And this has been going on. They've been working together since 2013. And it's been a very interesting partnership that began some time ago. But as of recently, it's recently been announced that they are going to begin offering sales online. So the bank and the restaurant together are going to be working to sell online goods through Amazon. This is it's an interesting concept to me for a bank to be selling goods online. You don't think a lot about that, about how banks get their money from selling goods, but they do. So they're going to be selling items such as aprons, chocolate, cocoa bars, tote bags, all kinds of little trinkets and whatnot. But what does this mean for you guys? Why are they doing this? Basically, what I understand from it is that they are trying to make a reintroduction into the market by creating a new avenue for themselves to be known in a new way. They're trying to break into e-commerce is essentially what's going on. Recently, as I'm watching the numbers, it looks like BBVA's stocks have been very slightly in the red by just over 1%, but have been very slowly but steadily increasing. Numbers as early as this morning were down by about 1.4, 1.5%. As I'm looking at the numbers right now, we are climbing up just a little bit so that we're only down by 1.16%, 1.08%. So we're starting to make a little bit of a climb with BBVA stock value. So that's something to take a look at, is to start looking at what these companies are doing. If you have any investment or interest in these companies, look out for the ones who are on the front of the digital market, and who's really taking advantage of opportunities like working with Amazon. Amazon's a powerful force, and it can make a huge impact on the validity and the strength of a company when they have such a strong digital presence. So obviously that's what BBVA is working on accomplishing. If you guys have any questions about this or any other comments, that would be interesting to hear about. I'm going to keep an eye on this one and start looking out for other companies who are also starting to break into the digital world and how that affects their strength as a company. That's going to be very interesting. And we'll take a look at who is doing it best and how they're doing it best, how that affects their value, and who starts to really take the lead as far as digital presence and strength as a company as a result of going digital or breaking into e-commerce in some way. Obviously, with BBVA breaking into e-commerce, we are not going to be having mortgages and, certificates of deposit sold online, but we will have other tokens, like I said, aprons, tote bags, etc. So just a different kind of thing, but we're not going to have any sort of bonds sold online through the bank. That's still going to be, as far as I understand, handled as the bank would typically handle it. So there's nothing that's going to be a huge transformation as of yet. But again, that's something that we can keep an eye out on as the world becomes more technologically influenced and more digital. So that will wrap up today's session. I really, really appreciate you guys stopping in today, for listening, for joining me. And hopefully you will enjoy embarking on this journey as we work together to learn more about what's going on in the world, and to gain more insight, more knowledge, and a little more detail about the world of finance and financial news as we move forward with the show. Thank you so much for listening to the GSMC podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you also please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
You've been listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's podcast.